Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of The World's End. Now, The World's End is the final entry in the trilogy that is referred to as Blood and Ice Cream. This began in 2004 when director Edgar Wright teamed up with actor-comedians Nick Frost and Simon Pegg to do Shaun of the Dead. Now, Shaun of the Dead was a low-budgeted film, and pretty much everybody involved were considered nobodies at that time, especially on an international level. But much to everybody's surprise, it ended up being a box office hit throughout the world and was well received by just about everybody who saw it. I actually watched it in theaters, and at the time I liked it, but I wasn't in love with it. I didn't understand a lot of the British humor, I guess. But since then, every time I've watched it, it just got better and better, and to where it's now actually one of my personal favorite comedies. When I watched it last, I gave it the full 4-star rating and did a written review if you're interested in seeing that. You can find that on my website. But just to sum up what I love about it, I love that it's a good satire of zombie films, but also a good zombie film in itself. And it's just filled with plenty of laugh-out-loud moments, but it has a lot of the smaller laughs too. It's really well paced, whereas a lot of comedies, they're either like The Internship, where there's a lot of small laughs but not many big laughs, or you have Hangover 3, which might have some big laughs but not many small laughs. But Shaun of the Dead just had me cracking up the entire time, and yet it also was more than just a comedy. It had some really good dramatic moments where you really felt sad for these characters, and I thought the fact that they actually managed to develop this cast of characters was really impressive too. It was just an all-around good movie, if not a great one, but above everything, it just made me laugh quite a bit. So I was really excited when this team got back together to produce Hot Fuzz. Now, Hot Fuzz ended up being a much bigger box office success than Shaun of the Dead was, but everybody was split as to whether it was better than Shaun of the Dead, maybe not quite as good, or just on the same level. And I guess I'd say they're on the same level, but I prefer Shaun of the Dead. Hot Fuzz was a send-up of buddy cop action movies, and while I do like those kinds of films, I prefer zombie films more, so that might be why I prefer Shaun of the Dead. But also, I think Hot Fuzz, it had more high moments than Shaun of the Dead. I thought it had the funniest parts in Hot Fuzz did make me laugh harder than the funniest parts of Shaun of the Dead, which is an impressive task in itself. But also, it seemed like Shaun of the Dead was more consistent, whereas Hot Fuzz had some downtime, if memory serves. But they're still both great movies, and I'd recommend everybody check both of them out. Now, after that, everybody pretty much went off to do their own thing. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost did re-team up to do Paul. I hated Paul. I didn't think it was funny at all. Then Edgar Wright, he went on to do Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, which has many fans, but I'm not one of them. I do not like the fact that of all these interesting characters, they have to focus on the two people who bore me to death and have a very unsubstantial love story, which we're supposed to take as being something more than that. I hate those kinds of movies, and I thought the hyperactive editing style, which was charming in Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz because it made mundane actions seem so intense, it just got annoying in Scott Pilgrim, and it's just not my kind of movie. For the same reason I don't like Speed Race. I just don't like those kinds of visuals, and it just needs to calm down. Then, of course, Simon Pegg went on to do, the Mission Impossible franchise, and he joined the Star Trek cast, and the only thing I've honestly seen Nick Frost since Hot Fuzz, other than Paul, was in Attack the Block, which I thought was okay, nothing special. But now they finally come back together to give us The World's End. And is it a good movie? Is it a worthy conclusion to those films, even though they have nothing to do with each other? I can't remember the exact connection the director gave each of these films, but he just refers to it as, I believe, the Blood and Ice Cream trilogy. It has the same actors, but they're all playing different characters. It takes place presumably in different worlds. But did I like this movie? Absolutely. In fact, I'm not sure if I'd say it's better than Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead, but it's at least on their level. Now, the first thing you should know about The World's End is, even though it seems like it's being a send-up to science fiction films such as Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I really don't know if that's really what it is. It's at least not as concrete as the previous two films were. Honestly, I felt like it was being its own entity. It wasn't really relying on, past films to build its story on, and it's not really parodying anything. It's funny for its own reasons, and I think the first thing it does right is it introduces us to some really interesting characters. They're all funny, but all in different ways, and watching them interact, the chemistry they have between each other is just a lot of fun. And the whole premise is they want to go back. These guys were friends as teenagers, but they all went their different ways, and now they're kind of being brought back together so they can finish this bar hopping deal that's supposed to be like really epic, where they go to each of these different bars and drink a pint there, and if they can make it to the final one, which is called the World's End, then they've finally accomplished their goal. But it turns out that the townsfolk have been replaced by these robot people, so a lot of action ensues. And I think part of the thing that also cracked me up is they continue to do all this bar crawling in spite of everything that's going around them. But I really had an attachment to each of these characters. I think they were all very relatable, but at the same time they were interesting. They weren't just bland. A lot of these movies, I think, even though I'd say Simon Pegg's character steals the show, it's not because everybody else is uninteresting. It's just that Simon Pegg is playing a much more interesting character, and that really says a lot. But I still loved them all, and I loved how they played off of each other. And some of the acting really was impressive. One of the gimmicks of this movie that I was not sure I'd like was how Simon Pegg and Nick Frost were more or less switching their kinds of roles. In the previous films, Simon Pegg was the straight guy to Nick Frost's wild and goofy guy. But in this time around, Simon Pegg is the real wild guy, and Nick Frost is the straight guy. Well, actually, I thought it worked really well. And in fact, if they went their usual route, I don't think it would have worked as well. I need to seriously work on how I phrase these sentences. Like, for example, when Nick Frost played this kind of role, he was much more slow-paced and lethargic in his delivery, which worked because he was usually playing these dumb, lazy characters. Whereas Simon Pegg's character is just all out. He's very energetic. Everything he says almost as quickly as possible. It just, something about it just cracked me up nonstop whenever either of these guys would play their various roles, because Nick Frost, I actually could buy him as more of a straight guy, because he seems like just an average person, but there is a real character there, and he gets quite a bit to do. And watching him, because he was apparently a hardcore partier as a teenager, and he sort of kind of comes back into that role, but at the same time, he never loses his core personality, and that's a really difficult thing to pull off. So obviously that's one thing going for it, is that it had a great cast of characters played by great actors, but also it just seemed like every scene had one laugh out loud moment that just would crack me up nonstop, to where I felt like I was missing on other really funny moments because I was too busy laughing at previous funny moments. I don't even know if I want to say it, but for example, one line, this one character keeps saying WTF, and then after the first action scene where they kill a bunch of these robots, and he says WTF, and Simon Pegg's like, what the fuck does WTF mean? And then that joke continues, but I think the payoff ended up being funnier than just that setup. But it just seemed like every scene had something like that I'm going to continue to quote. And if it wasn't the dialogue in itself that was funny, it was just their facial expressions, their reactions to certain lines. And it was non-stop. This film never really slows down. Now, I will say that the second half doesn't contain as many laughs as the first half did, but that's only because the second half is starting to balance comedy and action. Now they're being chased and stuff like that, but still, it never became boring. I found the action to be incredibly well choreographed. The special effects are good, but at the same time, at times kind of wasteful. Like, there's this big-ass robot that you see in the trailer, but it doesn't really do a whole lot in the movie outside of what you see in the trailer. I don't really know why they bothered to have that. But still, I just thought it was an all-around entertaining movie, whether it was being comedy or action. Now, it's never as intense as either Hot Fuzz or Shaun of the Dead were. you never really feel that these characters are in as much danger as those films managed to do. But still, since this movie was doing its own thing, that didn't bother me as much. Also, one thing I really like too is how the drama works. Now, and I don't remember a whole lot of drama in Hot Fuzz, but in Shaun of the Dead, it was kind of mood whiplashy. You had funny moments, and suddenly something dark would happen. It becomes kind of, depressing after that for a little bit, and eventually it will pick up as a comedy again. And even though I thought they did that very well, in this film they only have about 2 minutes of actual dramatic material. Everything else is intended to be a little bit more lighthearted or funny, even when the action scenes are going on. But at the same time, they made it work because there's a lot of foreshadowing to a lot of these characters' problems. For example, with Simon Pegg's character, you can tell from the beginning that he's very troubled. He has a drinking problem and probably a drug problem, and he's very unhappy with his life, so he wants to relive the glory days. And I thought they did a good job at conveying it without actually flat out saying so throughout the first 2/3 of the film. And then at the very end, when he has kind of a breakdown, it fits because you felt that he was building to this point, but at the same time, once again, it never really lingers on the drama too long before another joke hits. So to me, it had a much more consistent tone as well. And I think, if you thought Shaun of the Dead, for example, was a little bit bipolar in regards to its tone, you might appreciate this more. Anything else I could say? Not really. It made me laugh from beginning to end. Is it the best comedy of the summer? It's difficult to say. This is the End and The World's End. I bet the two best comedies of the summer would have kind of a similar title. They're both very different kinds of comedies, so I don't know if I should be comparing them, but I love them both in each of their chosen styles of comedy. One thing too, it's funny because Shaun of the Dead was a little British in its style of humor, but once I got more used to that, I actually appreciated it more. And actually, since I saw Shaun of the Dead for the first time, I've become a pretty big fan of English humor in general. I love watching Monty Python and a bunch of other movies that I probably would never even given the chance or the time of day back when I was younger. But then I felt Hot Fuzz, you could tell that they were kind of broadening their horizons, that it was mixing English humor with more American humor. And this film kind of follows in that trend. It's not as American, though, as Hot Fuzz was. It just seems like it was just an all-around funny movie. You don't have to be English to understand a lot of the jokes, but you can be I'd presume from any culture, and I think you'd get it. But of course, I can't really say that with clarity because I am not from every culture. But I never really saw a lot of the humor in this as just British. I just thought it had a much more international feel, while at the same time it's not losing its English origins. So yeah, obviously I would recommend you check this movie out without a doubt. I'd say go see it in theaters, maybe even see it, as a full price, just because this movie is not doing very well financially right now. It deserves so much more. So if there's any film you see this weekend, definitely check out The World's End. I did not do a written review of this, but you can read my written reviews of When a Stranger Calls, the remake, War of the Arrows, and well, You're Next. And you could also watch that video if you're interested in seeing that. But I thought this was much, 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 much better than You're Next. So I'll see you guys later.